Hi, my name is Phil. I like talking about politics, and John Bercow, the Speaker of the House of Commons, has today announced his resignation. He's going to be standing down on October the 31st. So what I'd like to discuss is his role as Speaker, what set him apart from perhaps other speakers and times, potential reasons for why he's stepping down at this point. But first, if you find yourself enjoying the video, then please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. So, first of all, the news that preceded this announcement was that the Conservatives were, out of pure spite, going to stand a candidate against John Bercow in his Buckinghamshire constituency in the upcoming general election. Now, for those who aren't really familiar with this, there is a bit of a convention when it comes to general elections and the Speaker of the House. So, the Speaker, when a new one is being elected, they're always elected from currently sitting MPs. Usually, well, it does need to be from ones who have a fair amount of parliamentary experience. It's a complex role. I mean, some people may have experience of being a chair, because effectively the role of Speaker is to chair debates in the Commons. You know, and many of us may well have chaired committees in the past, and sometimes it's relatively straightforward, sometimes not so much. I think when it's relatively straightforward is when it's a committee of people who are pretty much all working towards the same goal. When it's something like a legislative assembly, where of course you've got very fierce political opponents on either side, it becomes rather complex. So it needs to be someone who knows all the very archaic procedures. You've got to bear in mind the House of Commons is centuries old. It's ancient, truly ancient. There's an awful lot of procedures there. The Speaker from time to time needs advice as well, but they need to be pretty much on it. And but when you've got a Speaker in post, you want them in post for a fair amount of time. You know, you want them in for a decent amount of time. You don't want to chop and change them all the time. So there is and the Speaker, who will have belonged to a particular political party, or they don't have to have been, but they generally have been, I think almost exclusively have been, in fact. John Bercow, for example, was a Conservative. Now, the Speaker is supposed to be politically impartial, so they have to leave their political party becoming Speaker. And then when they stop being Speaker, they're still not supposed to be political. They will carry on as an MP until the next general election. Then they usually retire and maybe get kicked up into the Lords or something like that. So other parties, by convention, do not stand a candidate in their constituency because they're all saying, look, you're the Speaker, we want you to chair our debates and so on. And it sort of generally alternates between a Labour Speaker and a Conservative Speaker. But the convention of not standing a candidate was about to be broken. So you were effectively going to have the Conservative Party standing a Conservative candidate against the formerly Conservative Speaker of the House, flying against all convention. And you might imagine that John Bercow has now, just a few days later, or a couple of days later, announced his resignation to avoid what would be a very public political mess. Because if the Conservatives did that, and no one doubts that Boris Johnson would do it just as a party and shot out of spite because he's lost everything else. And if he did that, it breaks a convention. And when you break a convention that is there for good reason, why should the other side, when the shoe's on the other foot, not break the convention themselves? You basically have broken the convention, if you see what I mean. So you could argue, or maybe he's stepped down, he's announced his resignation, so to avoid that mess. I don't actually think so. John Bercow, it was heavily rumoured, had intended to step down before now anyway. The reason he had not done so until now is, and he said himself, it was because he thought it would be, reckless to step down and have another Speaker step up at such a time when Brexit was going through all these problems. You really needed some consistency there. And we absolutely did. So he's chosen to step down on either October the 31st or, a bit cheekily, he said, if there's a general election, whichever comes first, knowing full well there's not going to be a general election before October the 31st. I think he was being a bit cheeky there. And the reason for that is he said it's a good time, because it is. On October the 31st, if Boris Johnson doesn't get his way, and legally he can't get his way now, that is now certain, but more about that tomorrow. We'll have the extension and Parliament will, at that point, you would think, sort of know what's going on. It's not a bad time to step down. And given that there's going to be a general election very soon after anyway, and he didn't intend to go beyond that either. So it was a good time to step down. The other important thing he's noted is he said he wants to step down before the general election because he doesn't want the election of the next speaker to take place when you've got a load of new MPs. And there are, come what may, going to be a load of new MPs entering the House who won't know the candidates on a personal level. You know, we may have heard of some of them like Sir Edward Lee or Harriet Harman, but those MPs won't know them personally. And I think it's a good idea to know your speaker personally in order to vote for them. And those MPs would therefore be directed by their whips. And in other words, it would be a party leadership election, which it shouldn't be. It should be for individual MPs. The Speaker, and this is what has caused such anxiety among some MPs, it is the Speaker's role to represent Parliament, not the government. This is why the government, both Theresa May's government and Boris Johnson's government, have been bleating about the Speaker. It's because he stood up for Parliament, which is what he's supposed to do. A lot of the criticisms have been for allowing certain debates and votes to take place, such as the vote this week, for example, the Standing Order 24, not this week, that's last week, sorry, where the government said, oh, you shouldn't have done that. Yes, he should have done that. It was perfectly proper, because what he is supposed to do is decide which motions get to be debated and voted on based upon what is in what the desire of Parliament is. He's basically doing what Parliament wants. And if a motion is debated upon and voted on and the motion wins, that justifies his position. Because if it won, that meant a majority of Parliament were in favour of it. And that's ultimately the bottom line. You know, and the reason why there has to be any choosing at all, the government always gets to put forward motions. But backbench MPs also now and then need to put forward motions. They are MPs. But all of them probably want to at one time or other put forward some motions. They can't all be debated and voted on in any reasonable amount of time. So the Speaker has to get a feeling for which ones have, you know, a large amount of support and decide which ones have the best prospect of success. And some people will say, well, you know, the way parliamentary business has been conducted in the last few years is very different to the past, as if John Bercow has somehow been doing something against all convention. Which is not really true, because what normally happens in Britain is we have a majority government. In the case of a majority government, where the Prime Minister can whip their MPs, and even if there's a few rebels, the majority will vote as the Prime Minister directs them. A government doesn't usually, it's very rare that a government will lose a vote in that situation. Now, what that means is, if a backbencher proposes a motion that the government is dead set against, the Speaker is often, more often than not, going to take the view, well, this will not succeed in a vote, so why do it? If it's a matter of massive public interest, then maybe they allow it for that. But there still has to be a reasonable amount of support. It has to at least be a close vote. In their opinion, it would go to a close vote. But, you know, if you're in a majority government situation, the government's saying, well, we're not going to support this motion. Well, the Speaker will look at it and go, well, it's going to be voted down. Is there really any point? And if there is no point even in the debate, then of course they'll say no, until they'll decline an awful lot of these backbencher motions. But in a situation like now, where you've got a minority government, so it's never the Prime Minister saying that they don't support a motion doesn't make it clear that it would lose. And also when a lot of these motions have been on crucial matters about the future constitutional arrangements of the UK, then of course it's obvious that there's an awful lot of motions going to be debated and voted on that the government don't like. Well, do you know what? Tough titty, should have won the general election properly by getting a majority. Theresa May had a majority and lost it. Boris Johnson had a tiny theoretical majority and then sacked it. So neither of those prime ministers has got any call to complain. So the other thing about this, which was quite unedifying, I should really finish off with, I suppose. So he's made his resignation speech. It lasted 7 or 8 minutes, where he should have been roundly applauded around the House, and he was not. Obviously, the opposition benchers were forthcoming with their praise for him. Some Conservatives also, it has to be said. But the government and, you know, either the Conservative MPs behaving themselves and especially the Brexiteer Conservatives didn't give him a standing ovation at all. However, I will say this. There wasn't a lot of very ill feeling. Even the likes of Peter Bone and Stephen Baker. Do I mean Barker or Baker? I can never remember. The idiot guy in the ERG who's one of the chief Brexiteers, or it used to be. Both of those said something, and they were actually perfectly civil and thanked him for his service, because as one of them said, it doesn't matter what, they think on a personal level in terms of his decisions. What has been really clear to everyone is that he has done his job to back Parliament. He's done his job well. He hasn't abused any power. He's made his decisions in the best interest of Parliament, which is what is his job to do. It's not his job to represent the executive, the government. It's the leader of the House that represents the government, which at the moment is Jacob Rees-Mogg, was formerly Andrea Leadsom. It is not John Bercow's job to represent the government. It is John Bercow's job to represent the House of Commons, and that he has done. So the praise for him is well deserved, even amongst those who've been a bit snippy about him. Michael Gove, representing the government, I have to say, did stand up and say exactly what he should have done, which is to thank John Bercow for his service and to acknowledge that he has been a good servant. It's just a shame that the government front bench, out of, again, pure spite, refused to stand up and acknowledge what he'd done. But that is what we've got. We've got a mealy-mouthed government. Boris Johnson yet again taking the leaf out of the Trump book of dictatorship and being miserable as sin and very petulant whenever he doesn't get his own way. But anyway, talking about not getting his own way, that'll be the topic, I suppose, for tomorrow now. I hope you found this video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.